Who thinks recessions are bad news? Are people scared of recessions? What's most, who thinks it's an opportunity? Why is it an opportunity? Shout something out. Why are there more deals? Scared. What sort of people are scared?
People that are like the Baker Street property meeting.
Well, thank you. Drinking the bar later. No, you're absolutely right. Fear comes from not being in the know. Not being in the know and not being prepared. And what we try to do is give you the information so that you're prepared to take on these sort of challenges. So I'm not going to waffle on any longer. I want you guys to put a big hand together for Kwasi. And you've got to really give him a mega applause, because I know that he's got a lot in his head, and he's only going to share it if you're enthusiastic. And if it's a lackluster clap, you know, he's going to keep all these secrets and tips for somebody else. So after 3, 1, 2, 3, big round of applause for Kwasi Affum. Whoa! Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you. Wow. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me, especially at the back. Is that a yes or no? Didn't hear it? Yes. Thank you. Much better. So hopefully you guys are live and you're going to be interactive. I'm going to be going through some content. Now, if you're not awake, this can be very dry and very boring because it's very brain food, as I call it. It's really cognitive stuff. But so get awake, get focused, and really let's get to it. So today I want to talk to you guys about 3 things in particular. I want to talk about interest rates and inflation. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, something that's going on with those two. I want to talk about sustainability. Again, I don't know if you've come across that term in your day-to-day. And obviously, since this is the Baker Street property meet, why not talk a little bit about property? How does that sound? Is there anything in particular that you guys would like to hear about within those topics? Shout it out for me now.
Inflation and interest rates.
That's your forecast. My forecast. Okay. I like the fact you used the word forecast. Someone else?
Property prices.
Okay, we could talk about that. Okay. What was that, sorry?
Market capitalization rate.
We'll definitely touch on that.
Finance opportunities.
Finance. Yep, we'll definitely touch on that. We'll talk less about that. So my name's Kwasi, and I'm a property investor, like a lot of you in the room, I'm sure. And if you're not, then I'm sure you want to be as well, right? By day, I work in investment banking, and as it says, I do impact assessment. But what does that even mean? Well, I look at what's happening and try to understand what the impact is on the bank that I work for, which in this case is Barclays. So I look at all the stuff that's going on in the economy, whether it's interest rates, whether it's changes in trends around sustainability, or whether it's markets in general, not just property, and try to kind of come up with a scenario and try to develop a strategy. Everybody uses the word strategy. Does anyone actually know what strategy means? Plan?
It's a long-term plan.
Yes. Who said that? Put your hand up. Give that man a round of applause. So, by definition, a strategy is a plan for the long term, right? And so, understanding what's going on in the economy, understanding what's happening around the world, and then trying to come up with a plan for that long term. That's basically what I do. At the start of this year, everyone thought the biggest problems we were going to face was around Omicron. Who even remembers that word? Right? It was everywhere. It was in the news everywhere. Now you don't even hear about it. But that's a testament to how the world works and how quickly things change. It's the reason why you always have to be ready to adapt. You adapt yourself, adapt your business, no matter what you're doing. Now, the thing that everybody is most concerned about is the cost of living crisis that we're all in. What does that even mean, though? Well, inflation is running at a 40-year high. What that means is that prices right now are going up at about almost 11%. That doesn't even touch the tip of the iceberg. I read this morning a report that said that fridges, washing machines, and similar white goods are up by a third in the last 12 months. Now, so I do property like a lot of you. I buy white goods every 3 to 6 months or so, and I'm paying a third more than I was just 12 months ago, which is crazy, which has knock-on effect. So people might talk a lot about inflation, they might say 10%, but really, if you look at energy prices, that's up a lot more. In my property business, I do HMOs, which means that I carry the cost, right? Now, if you look at the cost of energy, which is embedded into my costs at the moment, they're up probably about 70% in the last 2 years. Why? Because my tenants spend a lot more time at home, and the cost of energy is rising through the roof. So it's great when you see in the media the headlines around this is what's happening, but as a business owner and as a strategist, really it's about looking a lot deeper. I look in my HMO business and I have a lot of tenants who were migrants, economic migrants, come from abroad to work here. Well, we have this environment now economically where the labor market is so tight. What that means is that we probably have more jobs than we have people looking for jobs. That has a knock-on effect into things that I do now in terms of the type of properties that I'm looking at, the model that I operate in general, how I find those tenants, how I find those customers. But again, that's not new. And then you have the fact that a lot of my tenants that I have would have been getting things like furlough or additional support from the government through hard times. Well, in this cost of living crisis, they're probably not getting any of that. So again, that needs to filter through into the way that I operate my business. Interest rates. So one of the things when it comes to interest rates is that the Bank of England has spent a lot of time priming us all and telling us that interest rates are actually going to go up. What they haven't told us is how they screwed everything up, and it's really because of them that interest rates have to go up, but that's another story. We live in this world now where they've overstimulated the economy with tens of billions of COVID-era support. We were all happy getting bounce-back loans and C-bills and all of these things, but naturally, this is the knock-on effect. And the bank should have known, because that's their job. But they stimulated the economy, and now they're trying to do the opposite. In fact, they will never say this, what I'm about to say to you, but I can tell you that the Bank of England is trying to put the economy into recession. That's their unstated objective, because that's the only tool they have in order to curb the inflation that I spoke about, which is at a 40-year high. They want to cool the economy, get things maybe in a reverse so there's less demand, and then try to reset again. So when you hear talk about recessions coming, and as Ranjan pointed out, generally the media will talk about recession as being a negative. But here I'm giving you a very specific use case of where the Bank of England, who look after the whole country, are trying to force the country into recession. I mean, why would they do that? And so here's a question. Who thinks the next move for interest rates is going to be up? That's a lot of people. Who thinks the next move is going to be down? You think the next move is going to be down? That's a contrarian person. And who thinks the interest rates will stay the same? Okay, very few. The next move is in August. So the next Bank of England announcement will be in August. I put on here quarter of a percent. Let's just go, yeah. So this is what I think, actually. I think the next move in August next month will be 0.5, so 50 basis points increase. Not the quarter of a percent that we've been getting, which has been nice. But actually, they're going to have to ramp it up because so far they've increased interest rates by 0.5 over the last 6 months or so. And what's happened? Inflation has got higher. So if you're doing something and it's not working, you can either admit you're wrong or you can just keep doing it. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to just top it up and double it up and force the economy into recession. Again, why are they doing that? Because they want to cool growth. They don't necessarily want growth to spiral out of control. And to Ranjan's point earlier, when recession comes, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Right? Do we believe that? Who doesn't believe that? Good. We are believers in the room. So I want to talk a bit about why we're in recession. So when I look in my everyday life, when you look at the strategy and you put things together, the why is always important. People often don't talk about the why, but the why is really important. And the why is never one thing. Again, like Ranjan said, there are normally a series of factors that pull together to create a scenario. And it's always very difficult to say specifically what's going to happen. That's why it's a forecast. The difference between a forecast and a prediction is that if I predict something, I say it's going to happen. If I forecast something, it's conditional. So the forecast that what we're going to talk about today is based on a number of things. But if any of those, so if the Bank of England doesn't increase interest rates, or if it increases interest rates by more than 0.25%, it changes. If it increases it by less, then it changes. At the start of the pandemic, when I was doing this in my day job, trying to predict, and so in February, so the lockdown happened in March 2020. In February 2020, I had to come up with assessment and strategy for the pandemic that hadn't happened yet. Fun. But actually, as I started looking at it, I realized it wasn't that difficult. It wasn't that complicated to figure out the forecast. The bit that was difficult was the unknown unknown. I didn't know that they were going to do furlough C-bills to the tune of hundreds of billions. I didn't know they were going to do any of those things. So ultimately, my forecast wouldn't have been correct, but because I didn't have any of those inputs, I don't know what I don't know. And that's always important to remember. I want to come back to this before I forget, actually. So someone said earlier, interest rates and how they're going to go. So this is really interesting to me. So point out a couple of things to bear in mind, right? So probably in the last year, a lot of people didn't think interest rates were going to go up. Now, as we stand here, I can tell you that at some point, the terminal rate, the highest rate interest rate will rise to could be about 3.5%. Bearing in mind the Bank of England cut it to 0.1% not that long ago, we're talking about a massive rise in interest rates for anyone who has never seen interest rates that high. Ranjan asked a question earlier, who's had a mortgage, who started in the last 10 years? I started in the last 10 years. I have never seen interest rates. I think the highest rate I had paid until recently was something like, overall, was something like 2 point something. And now you're going to be talking about 5% onwards, so I'm doubling. My financing costs are going to be 100% more than they were not that long ago, which makes a massive difference when you're financially modeling, if you like spreadsheets like me. So what's going to happen with interest rates? Here, the green one is what the Bank of England say is going to happen. I left, that's what they say they're going to do. The purple one is what people like me think they're going to do. That's what the market analysts think is going to happen. I think the terminal rate will be high, but I also think that it will fall faster, personally. That's my personal view, is that it will fall faster. So bearing in mind, what does that mean? For example, so if I've got a mortgage variable, why would you do that? That's really suicidal. You want to fix. How long should you fix for? As long as possible. I read as well, what was it? So you could get a 5-year fixed rate for less than a 2-year fixed rate. That's weird, because normally things that are further out are considered more risky, and so you pay a premium for it to get the security and the guarantee compared to things that are closer in. So it's similar to bonds when you talk about the bond yield curve inversion. When stuff that's further out is cheaper than the stuff that's right in front of you, that tells you that there's a mismatch in the market. But fixing long-term, 5, 10 years, these days you can get 10-year mortgages. 10 years ago when I started, you could even get 10-year mortgages, really. Fixing. I think one of the other things that we all have to bear in mind is, as property investors, is the tax environment. So as well as paying interest rates, which are now, as I say, going to 100%, you're going to have additional costs on top of all of this. As we move to a new prime minister, we move to a whole new paradigm shift, as well as the recession. So security and fixing is one of the big things that I keep talking about. Briefly on wages, so we've been very lucky that the labor market is very tight. A lot of the inflation that we've been getting isn't because, it's not, actually I should say this, so I'm bashing the Bank of England a lot, so I'll carry on. They're increasing interest rates. The problem is that the thing that interest rate affects isn't the thing that's causing inflation. So they're going to increase interest rates by 0.5%. They've increased interest rates by 0.5% so far. It hasn't done anything to inflation, I said earlier. Going to increase it by another 0.5%. It's not going to do anything in itself to inflation. Because the things that are causing inflation are really around bottlenecks in the supply chain, post-pandemic, post-Brexit, post people not wanting to work anymore because they can now work online as they discovered during the pandemic. Now there are all these supply chain bottlenecks. You've got, the airlines have bottlenecks because people don't want to work as a baggage handler. I know I don't want to work as a baggage handler. I would have respected them because those bags, my bag is always very heavy and it's always more than whatever the allowance limit is. So I always felt for their backs in those situations. Now they feel for their own backs because they got to sit at home and not have to lift bags and they don't want to go back to work. So we can't get flights. Those are the things causing inflation. The reason my flights have gone up from $2,000 to $3,500 is not because of anything that the Bank of England can fix. You know, post-Brexit, you saw the other day, Calais, Dover, all of these places are now having bottlenecks at the border. Again, increasing interest rates isn't going to address that. That stuff happens every day anyway because of goods moving in and out, which adds cost. It's called friction. So all these additional frictional points add cost to the things that we're buying, which increases the prices. Increasing interest rates isn't going to change that. So staffing, you know, I used to have a house which had a lot of people from Eastern Europe. Now there are no I have one Eastern European tenant out of about 45, when I used to have some like 35, you know. These things are changing, and it's changing in front of us. Interest rates hiking isn't going to do anything, address any of that. So we've entered this era where it's really about the production constraints that are driving a lot of this. And, you know, again, what does that mean? A lot of the opportunities in the business world are around trying to address some of those production constraints, right? So people who are looking at logistic businesses. I've recently gone into partnership with a guy who's bringing people into this country from outside the EU to work in his logistics business because it's easier for him to source them directly from India and bring them here and get them everything sorted, even including giving them a home, than it is for him to go to a job center and find laborers and find people. That's the world we're living in now. So this is just some of the headwinds, I guess. One of the things that I haven't talked about, again, so when we talk about inflation, we import a lot into this country. People said post-Brexit that as the pound currency fell, it would increase exports. You would expect that the cost of things would decrease so people would buy more. Actually, the opposite has happened. And as costs of things from outside have got more expensive, we've imported more. And then in the same time, sterling has dropped even more. So things have got even more expensive. Increasing interest rates won't necessarily help that in the short term either. So we can expect that as the pound goes to 1.1 to the dollar, closer to the euro, anything we import, the cost of those are going up. Whether that's materials, commodities. Most commodities are priced in dollars. So petrol, we saw recently petrol prices going up, but what was really happening is that even when the government cut the levy and cut the duty, the price still kept going up because that same week the pound fell by more than they cut the duty by, so it made no difference. But these are all the dynamics at play that are driving our economy. So I mentioned everybody talks about inflation, and you know, I did it at the start. I said inflation is at 10%, but I never that inflation headline figure, as I said, is made up of so many things. It's actually a pointless figure. The thing that I'm really driving at is the fact that there's two components to it. There's the bit that's volatile, like food, energy prices, a Russia war pushing up food and energy prices, gas prices going through the roof, etc. That's pushing up inflation, core inflation. But non-core inflation is the bit that we should all be worried about. That's things like energy costs. Sorry, not energy costs. That's things like transport, housing, other things around the house like clothing. Those are the things that are going up. And they keep talking about inflation. I'll make a prediction. This is a prediction. This food energy prices is going to fall. I said it here today. It will fall. Because, for example, I think this week, Russia opened up Nord Stream pipeline after they shut it off. I think as well, Russia made a deal with Ukraine to allow food and grain exports out. those things will find natural equilibrium as much as, war is terrible, but this is the world we live in, and then there'll be the balance found and the prices will go down. That bit I'm not worried about. The other things that I talked about, the production-related issues, I can't see necessarily a short-term path. So, the rising cost of living, but what does that mean for us as property investors? So I have tenants, and when I sell to often first-time buyers or young couples moving from flats to houses. The challenge that I'm going to face is that in the short run, a lot of the indicators are flagging that it's going to be difficult for those people to have the money to either raise the deposit. Wages are pretty strong right now, but with all the other things that are affecting it, to have any disposable income to be able to pay the rent above and beyond what they're currently paying. Savings is really important. We saw during the pandemic that the savings rate actually went up. So in blue, you have the savings of the UK. We weren't doing so good. The pandemic, when nobody was working or shopping or doing anything, we did amazingly well. And now it's starting to fall again. That's good and it's bad. We need people to spend their savings so that they can buy the houses that I'm building, please. And I'm not necessarily advocating for them using their savings to pay for their mortgages, but I prefer that to arrears. The bad thing will happen when this figure drops below that figure, which means that we're saving at a slower rate than we were in 2019, which means that we are really in stagflation. That's a whole different topic I'm not going to talk about. But the good thing is we do have low unemployment, we do have a high savings rate, and that's where I think the good news is for this country. That's where the good news is for all entrepreneurs. We do actually have I've gone through a lot of the bad stuff, a lot of the negative stuff, but we do actually have quite a stable base. The financial system is in a really good place. So you're going to be able to get access to funding. One of the things is that it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily how much deposit you have or even how much the house costs. It's your access to finance that's really important. If you can get a 100% LTV mortgage, you don't need a deposit. If those things exist, that's fine. Even if you can get 80%, you only need 20%. So the question is, what's the availability and what's the LTV? What lending to valuations are they doing? What multiples are they doing? What salary multiples are they doing? Really, those are the things that you should be focused on. I focus less on the headline price for the house and more about the ability to finance, because I wish I was buying everything for cash, but I'm not. So the financing is really important, and as a country in general, we have a really strong financial system, more so than in 2008. This is the point I was making. I was looking for the slide. You see, I came prepared because it's on there. But yeah, so the key thing really is about the availability of low-cost mortgages. That's what drives the property market, and you can see that. There are loads of graphs. I didn't want to get too technical today, but there are loads of graphs that show this. And that's what's been driving house price inflation. Another point I make, which isn't on the slide because I just found out, the house prices in real terms are actually 8% less than they were in 2008. So house prices have gone up, but there is also inflation at the same time. And so that's how you normalize both for real terms. And actually in real terms, house prices are cheaper than they were in 2007, which tells me that there's still a bit of scope for how, I don't think there's going to be a crash. I don't think things are going to, because actually there's still that, yeah. So I think the property market in general is in a really good place. I think the financing available is in a really good place. And more broadly, I'm not that pessimistic. One thing that does make me pessimistic is climate change. Now, I'm not a massive climate advocate. I work in finance, I do strategy. And again, so the big difference, I think, in terms of my purview is that I'm always looking forward. I'm always looking at the stuff that's coming. And so now, if I look at the stuff that's coming, what's the big iceberg on the horizon that's really going to take down the ship? And the thing is climate change. What is climate risk? So I define climate risk as investment risk. Ultimately, as an investor, there's lots of risks that I have to look at, whether it's if I'm investing in the stock market, it's the market risk. If I'm investing in the property market, there are lots of other risks, whether that's the tenant, whether it's the property market. But then now there's this new risk that I have to think about, and that's the climate risk. This is the risk that something is going to damage my investment. If I have a house, is there something that's going to risk that investment that I've made in some way? It could be, the interesting thing about climate risk is that it touches on so many different things. So everybody knows about the environmental side of it, right? I hope by now. Yeah? Who doesn't know about the environmental side of climate risk? Okay. That stuff's like we had this week where Ranjan mentioned the temperature hit 40.9 degrees. If you don't know, that's massively due to climate change or global climate change, the warming, blah, blah. So that stuff is not really in my bucket. I'm thinking, how is it affecting my investments? So that bit is known about, but at the same time, I know that there are other things happening. Because of the way that governments are looking at climate risk, they're putting pressure, whether it's pressure on house builders to use different materials, but more importantly, they're putting pressure on banks. They're putting pressure on banks in terms of who they lend their money to, what kind of projects they finance, and they're trying to use the financial system to drive change in any other sector, property just being one of them. So whether that's banks financing coal, the fossil fuel industry, or banks financing companies that are using bad practices when they're creating cement, companies that are causing pollution to the environment, companies that are damaging the water resources available. These are all factors now that we are going to have to all start considering in our projects as investors. Why? Because this is going to be part of the lending criteria. So climate risk is investment risk, and to a large extent, we all need to start adapting our investing to be able to account for that. One of the benefits, I guess, that banks are looking at is how they can incentivize people to do these things. So I talked earlier about the interest rates going up. One of the opportunities here is that actually they're going to have green products. So if you're doing a renovation to a house in order to make it more green, you might be able to get a better product, a cheaper product, a discounted product from the bank. Or if you're engaging in a project, we already know about the EPC. I'm sure a lot of you know about the EPC rules. But going into a bit more granularity, if you're doing a project where you're actually delivering stuff back to the environment, you might again get a discounted rate on the mortgage, on a green mortgage or other green products, green loans, home improvement loans for green. These are all the type of stuff, not necessarily on the market now, but coming. And this is what actually things like a recession will speed up, because you'll find out later that innovation is really one of the reasons why I'm most positive. So banks look for companies that are, or businesses or projects that are really looking to have a transition plan in place, looking to have an approach in place, looking to have made a lot of these considerations around things that are happening. And in that sense, they will look to give them incentives. The tune of these incentives apparently is about 24.7 trillion. Who wants some of that? So, according to research, the opportunity from green specifically over the next decade, that's only 10 years. We are like a year into that already, actually. 2 years into that. But that's 25 trillion in opportunity. We're talking about homes and properties and businesses and commercial properties that have low energy consumption. I work in an office that's carbon neutral, and it has been for many years. But these are the, if our company is buying an office or leasing any office spaces, Google, or if any of these companies are looking at it, the number one thing I guarantee you that they're looking at now is the energy efficiency of that. Yeah? So if you're doing a commercial property development and you want to actually be more forward-looking and develop something that's going to position you for the long term, and you don't have anything green, or you're not, more importantly, you're not leading on those green credentials, then you're missing a trick. So that's a huge opportunity. Not only is there that demand, but actually, the fact is that you will reduce the operational costs. We know we've seen now, I think originally 3 years ago when I was talking about this, nobody believed it. But now with energy prices going up where they are, everybody sees now that actually the cost of energy is a massive operational cost that's very volatile. So this is another key advantage. We've always said and we've all seen solar panels were so expensive 6 months ago. Now they're so cheap. The price hasn't changed, right? I think the key thing, though, is the sales premium. You can look through the CBRE data, and you will see that green buildings carry a premium of anywhere between 20 and 60% on similar buildings in the area. So, broadly speaking, as I say, I'm very confident about what's to come despite all of the negatives that are there, in large part because I think humans are really innovative. They'll come up with ways to get around the problems that we all face. And also, in large part because I think humans tend to emphasize the negative. We always see that negative and we think, oh, that's so terrible, but actually, these things have all happened. No, nothing is original. We've had many recessions. I'll finish on this point. A recession is defined as 2 quarters of negative growth. By definition, that's backwards looking. As I said at the start, I'm always forwards looking. So by the time you start thinking about recession, often it's already happened because those 2 quarters are behind you. The question is, where are you now and what's to come? So I'll leave it there. There's a panel discussion to come, and I'm sure we'll get into it a bit more. But thank you.
So much. Well, I don't know about you guys, but that was actually a positive spin on the recession and the data and what is coming up for us. Now, your day job, do you want to elaborate on what your day job is and what it involves so that these people can put this into context of who you are advising?
Yeah, so I look across the horizon at events that are either happening right now or we think will happen. It could be regulation, sustainability, it could be COVID, and then have to come up with scenarios around those things using history, so for COVID, for example, it's important to look at all the different pathogens and viruses, but actually none of them really were like COVID, but then projecting and then coming up with a scenario and then getting people to implement that.
And influencing the bank's direction of travel. So that is important because the banks are the people who give you what? Money. Oh. So this is the man that's influencing where the money goes. Yeah. So I was inspired by that, and I've got 100 questions, but it's not here for me to ask questions. It's here for you to ask questions at the panel when Ranjan and I have shared our little thoughts on where we're going. So do you have anything you want to chip in at this point?
Later. We'll leave it for later. Kwasi, look, that was fantastic talk, a lot of inspirational thoughts, and as I said, he's pulled together a lot of trends, and I think this climate change, is wonderful. We can all wear t-shirts more and roll the top down in our convertibles and have a few less rainy days. It's lovely, but it's going to bring a lot of opportunities, particularly for commercial property people. A lot of commercial property is old stock. It's not all carbon neutral buildings. And the thing with this old stock is very soon it's going to be mandatory to bring that old stock up to modern standards if you're going to let them out for commercial use. Now the thing is, because of the commercial values per square foot, it's not actually economically viable for the rent to bring up these buildings to standard for carbon neutral commercial use. But what exists? Permitted development. That allows you to convert commercial to residential. It allows you to basically uplift your values per square foot dramatically, which suddenly makes it economically viable because you're also doing the residential conversion while bringing it up to modern standards for sort of environment and EPCs and all of that. So that's why we're going to see a lot more commercial, that's one of the main reasons why we're going to see a lot more commercial buildings come on the market over the next couple of years.
Well, thank you for doing your talk for the evening, Ranjan.
Yeah, that was meant to be a summary, sorry. I didn't mean to go on that much, but
we'll be
Thank you.
Big round of applause.
Kwasi back on the panel. Another round of applause.